Surrounded by 18th and 19th century buildings, this ancient basilica, just a stone's throw from Santa Maria Maggiore, goes unnoticed by the casual tourist. The main entrance has long been abandoned. It consists of a barrel vault supported by two granite columns with Ionic capitals and inverted Tuscan capitals at the base, all dating back to the 13th century. It led, via a staircase now closed to visitors, into a porticoed courtyard that has now completely disappeared, of which a few Corinthian columns remain, incorporated into the surrounding buildings. The facade as we see it today is the result of a restoration carried out in 1937, aimed at restoring the basilica's medieval appearance, with results considered by many to be questionable. The main entrance dates back to the time of Cardinal Carlo Borromeo, who was titular patron of the basilica from 1564, whilst the small two-story bell tower, built into the left transept of the church in the 13th century, remains hidden from view. To access it, however, you must enter through a side door. If you look up, you can see some of the original 24 windows, which were closed off during the cardinal's renovation. Upon entering, the basilica-style layout, consisting of a central nave and two side aisles, is immediately apparent. Erected from scratch by Pope Paschal I during the 7 years of his pontificate, from 817 to 824, it is dedicated to Saint Praxedes, daughter of Senator Pudens and sister of Saint Pudentiana, and represents this pope's cultural manifesto aimed at reaffirming the central role of the Church of Rome, through the transfer of the martyrs' remains from the catacombs to the churches, and the reintroduction of sacred images, in opposition to the iconoclastic movements originating from the East, as established by the Second Council of Nicaea in 787.
Over the years, it has undergone various alterations that reflect the cultural climate of the time, such as the Cosmatesque-style floor dating from 1918 or the Corford ceiling constructed in 1868. Certainly, the renovation of the high altar and the chancel carried out between 1728 and 1734 at the behest of Cardinal Ludovico Pico della Mirandola, based on a design by the architect Francesco Ferrari and involving the installation of a square-plan ciborium, diminished the emotional impact of Pope Paschal's apse. The four stucco angels holding the symbols of martyrdom are by Giuseppe Risconi of Ticino. The three arches dividing the central nave date back to the 13th century and obviously serve to reinforce the structure, whilst 8 Corinthian columns on each side, with capitals rebuilt at the end of the 16th century, separate the central nave from the side aisles. The upper cornices are made of reused Roman material, and traces of inscriptions can still be seen. Between 1594 and 1596, Cardinal Alessandro de' Medici, the future Pope Leo XI, who died after a pontificate lasting just 17 days, commissioned a cycle of 8 frescoes depicting scenes from the Passion of Christ, entrusting the work to a group of late Mannerist painters. The works were placed above the architrave of the colonnade and beneath the windows commissioned by Cardinal Borromeo, set within a faux marble architectural frame. At the bottom, on either side, are equally faux bronze bas-reliefs depicting stories of Joseph the Hebrew, created by the Florentine Giovanni Balducci, known as Illinois Cossai, whilst above are angels holding the instruments of the Passion, standing on pedestals adorned with the Medici coat of arms. They are viewed starting from the left side of the chancel and proceeding anti-clockwise. The first fresco, also by Balducci, depicts Jesus praying after the Last Supper in the Garden of Gethsemane, followed by the capture of Christ, betrayed by Judas, with Peter cutting off the ear of the servant Malchus by the Roman artist Paris Nagari, Christ being led before Caiaphas, the high priest, by Girolamo Massei of Lucca, then Jesus and Pontius Pilate by Agostino Ciampelli of Florence, and by the same artist, the flagellation, followed by the crowning with thorns. By Baldesacro of Bologna, also by Ciampelli, is the Ecce Homo, and finally the Veronica by the aforementioned Balducci.
Passing the funerary monument to Cardinal Silvio Santacroce, dating from 1603, one comes to the first chapel on the right, currently dedicated to Our Lady of the Rosary, which is closed to the public. The vault dates from the late 19th century and, although not visible from the inside, features a painting by Domenico Pestrini depicting the blessed Tesoro Beccaria, beheaded by the Florentine Guelphs in 1258, whom Dante places in hell as a traitor to his country in Canto 22, whilst the altarpiece by Filippo Luzzi da Montecompatri depicts Saint Bernard da Uberti halting the floodwaters of the River Po, a feat which, given the droughts of our times, would not have earned him sainthood. All the figures depicted in the paintings, created between the late 17th and early 18th centuries, are monks of the Vallombrosan order, to whom the basilica has been entrusted since 1198. Further on, we come to the Sisi Chapel, which is also closed to visitors and features a 17th-century vaulted ceiling painted by Guillaume Coutoise, known as the Burgundian. In the center, God bestowing his blessing. In the four pendentives, Pope Paschal holding a model of the church, Saint Philip Neri, Saint Francis of Rome holding a book, and Saint Firmina with the palm of martyrdom. On the side walls, also by the Burgundian, are an adoration of the Magi and the vision of the birth of Mary. Opposite is a painting depicting Saint Pius X, dating from around 1955 by Luciano Bartoli.
But let us move on to the true jewel of the church, the Chapel of St. Zeno, perhaps the most significant monument of the 9th century in Rome. At the entrance, on the portal built entirely from reused materials, the inscription beneath the lintel unequivocally reveals the Pope's direct involvement, not only as a financier but also as the designer himself. Above the portal, on either side of a window where a 3rd-century cinerary urn rests, 2 series of medallions feature images of the Madonna and Child, 2 saints, perhaps Saint Zeno and Saint Valentine, and 8 other unidentified female saints, whilst the outer semicircle depicts Christ and the Apostles. Above, perhaps Moses and Elijah, and below, 2 popes, one of whom is thought to be Pasquale, added in the 19th century. Upon entering, one feels as though transported to another dimension where time stands still and space breathes slowly, now contracting, now expanding. Above, for angels support a medallion depicting a bust of Christ. They are virtually backed by an equal number of columns. On the floor, beneath the medallion, we see a circle of red porphyry surrounded by multicolored marble, a rare example of opus sectile that has miraculously survived numerous renovations. On the opposite facade is depicted the Letamesia, or the preparation, represented by an empty throne bearing the symbol of Jesus awaiting his return for the Last Judgment. On the left-hand wall, descending, are depicted the Saints Agnes, Pudentia, and Praxedes, who, with veiled hands, bear the crown of martyrdom, then the divine Lamb with the deer quenching their thirst at the river of life, which branches into 4 streams, then, on the inner side of the arch, Christ descending into hell to free Adam and Eve, and in the final panel, the Virgin Mary between Saints Praxedes and Pudentia, and, enveloped in a square halo, Theodora, Episcopa. Ask the mother of Pope Paschal, and since a mother is always a mother, she will be buried here. On the right-hand wall, separated by a blind window, are the Saints John, depicted as ever youthful with the Gospel, and Andrew and James with the scrolls of the law. In the lunette below, Christ is shown giving his blessing between 2 saints, possibly Saint Valentine and Saint Zeno. Below, carved out of a niche, is a small chapel dedicated to the Holy Column, where Jesus is said to have been scourged. It was brought to Rome during the 5th Crusade in 1223 and placed in a late 19th century bronze reliquary based on a design by Duilio Camballotti.
At the top of the front section, Mary and Saint John the Baptist are depicted in the typical pose of the decis, that is, interceding through prayer for the salvation of mankind. Here, however, Christ is symbolically replaced by a window through which light enters. In the arch below, decorated with flowers and animals, we find an episode from the Gospels, the Transfiguration, when Jesus withdraws with Peter, John, and James, of whom only a small hand is visible, and reveals himself in all his splendor alongside Moses and the prophet Elijah. On the altar, between two alabaster columns with Ionic capitals, a 17th-century wooden frame encloses the Virgin and Child, who is blessing, and on her left hand is a scroll bearing the inscription "I am the light." Beside them are the two saints, Praxedes and Pudentiana. This depiction may date from the second half of the 13th century. Finally, in the last chapel of the right aisle stands the funerary monument to Cardinal Alano Coetivi, a Breton by birth who served as titular priest of the church until his death in 1474. The work is attributed to Andrea Bregno, considered the greatest Lombard sculptor of the 15th century. Above the statue of the cardinal, who rests on a sarcophagus, two bas-reliefs depict Saint Peter with the key and Saint Paul gripping the hilt of a sword, whilst on either side, to the right, we find Saint Pudentiana with the palm of martyrdom and Saint Praxedes with the sponge and the vessel in which, according to tradition, she collected the blood shed by the martyrs during the persecution of Antoninus Pius. Finally, on the opposite wall, there is a fresco painted by the Roman artist Francesco Gari around 1860, depicting the flagellation of Christ. And that brings us to a halt. End of the first part. Greetings from VidLab.